I'm glad there are a few people here, that a few people want their independence. And one way, there are many ways to look at the Declaration of Independence, and I'll slide back and forth. One of them is, that the Declaration of Independence, one way to look at it is a way, to look at it is a declaration of war, against Great Britain. And another thing to keep in mind, and I'll come back to this as well, is, come on in, we're just starting. Did you pay for your ticket yet? Yes. We're not starting. Another way to look at the Declaration of Independence, or to keep an eye on this, is that the French help. Without the aid of the French, we lose the American Revolution. It works out, it sputters out in some sort of a negotiated settlement. But French help was critical to the success of the American Revolution. And the reason, and I'll come back to this as well, the reason that Louis XVI, the last French king, was willing to assist the Americans, the colonials, in the American Revolution is that he was hoping, one, to promote a civil war within the British Empire, and by promoting a civil war within the British Empire, weaken the British. See, Great Britain and France had always been at war. They had been at war for years. And to support the American Revolution financially, and with troops, and with the Navy, and with soldiers and so forth, that it would help to weaken the British Empire. And to weaken the British Empire would benefit the French. So there are a number of things that we'll return to, over time, or maybe, it will prompt a question. So I'm glad there are a few of us in the Holliston area, that want their independence. And you have it. You have it, courtesy of the American Revolution. Jefferson, long after the American Revolution, made the observation that the American Revolution was and I'm quoting him here, I hate doing that, quoting him here, that the Revolution was an expression of the American mind. And while he was true, as long as we add this to it, it was an expression of some American minds, not all. And John Adams got it right when, after the war, he made the observation about a third of the Americans supported the war. Canadians are welcome. You thought I forgot, didn't you?
And I'm not sitting next to him because he's probably going to go to sleep and embarrass his
Okay. No, John Adams got it right, that about a third of the colonials supported the American Revolution, about a third remained loyal, and about a third really didn't give a damn and hoped that the whole thing would blow over and we get back in business of being part of the British Empire and trading with the British. In our history books, certainly in the history books that teach American history at the high school level or at the junior high level, that distinction is not made. The distinction that's made, not the distinction, is presented as if every American, supported, the American Revolution, and that it was inevitable. And by the way, the Canadians did not. When Canada was offered a chance as the 14th colony to support the American Revolution or to be part of it, the Canadians said, nay, we're happy. We're happy in the British Empire. Why? Because they allowed us religious freedom, that we didn't have to become Protestant. We could maintain our Catholicism. So when Washington and others, hoped to pull in the Canadians, they said, we're happy just where we are, a member of the British Commonwealth. And without France today, this afternoon, we would be a member of the British Commonwealth or something like it. So let's begin. It always helps to begin at the beginning, doesn't it? So let's begin at the beginning, unless maybe you have a question before we start about the American Revolution at all. We're lucky we pulled it off. Even George Washington, after the Revolution, made the observation that pulling this off was a standing miracle. Now that never gets in the history books, does it? That it was I'm quoting him here, that it was a standing miracle that we pulled it off at all. Thank you, France. They've forgotten that long ago. Well, some have. So let's go back, as I said at the beginning. And I'm going to hang on to this because if I lean over, I'll fall on the floor. That would happen. That's all that you would remember, from this afternoon's presentation. There were 2 Continental Congresses. The Second Continental Congress organized committees to fight the Revolution. So what happened to the First Continental Congress? The First Continental Congress, I'll be brief here, the First Continental Congress was called in response to the Coercive Acts. And the Coercive Acts, without getting into all the details, was Parliament's response to the Boston Tea Party. Somebody has got to pay for this tea. Even Benjamin Franklin, back in Great Britain, made the observation, and he was really chewed up by the members of Parliament, castigated by the members of Parliament. Even Benjamin Franklin made the observation, somebody has to pay for this tea. In today's money, there were millions of dollars of tea destroyed. And Benjamin Franklin, a genuine hero of the American Revolution, early on said, somebody has to pay for this tea. You have truly twisted the tail of the lion. And somebody had better come up with the money. No one did, of course. And so that First Continental Congress was called in response to the Boston Tea Party. And what they talked about here is they weren't talking revolution at all. The R word they were talking about was reconciliation. How do we get back on good terms? Maybe not with Parliament, but with the King George III. How do we effect getting back on good terms with the King? Many towns had already declared their independence from Parliament. Maybe Holliston was one, I'm not sure. But many towns had already declared their independence, from Parliament, not from the King. I mean, the King is our father. I'm going to move that chair over so we can have eye contact, or you can move yours over as well. I always like to make eye contact with people when I'm talking with them. When you talk with someone that doesn't make eye contact, they're being shifty, aren't they? They don't believe what they're saying to you. It's hard to pull that off. So that First Continental Congress was about reconciliation, not about revolution. And when they adjourned in the fall of 1775, the agreement was that we will meet again in the spring of 1775. Dates really aren't important, but just to get a sense of sequence, that we'll meet again in the spring of 1775 and see where the situation is. Right now, we need to get home. We need to get home to get ready for the winter, to winterize the home, to get the crops in and so forth. So they left. They left on speaking terms. It was only a war of words. And the phrase we all know, taxation without representation is, what's the last word there? Taxation without representation is nobody. Tyranny. We aren't represented in Parliament. So that's where they left it. A war of words had not evolved into a shooting war. When they returned in May of 1775, now it was a shooting war. The events of Lexington and Concord, not too far from here, the events of Lexington and Concord had led to a shooting war. All right, so as the delegates arrived, now what do we do? How do we handle this? And from Massachusetts came John Adams, Samuel Adams, Elbridge Gerry, Robert Tree Payne, and John Hancock. And John Adams told these fellas, I will be the spokesman. See, John Adams had an ego. I mean, he really did. He really promoted himself. He truly did. He had to be the center of everything. Ask Abigail. I mean, Abigail suffered, if you may, suffered being married to John. In fact, Abigail's dad, Reverend Smith, wanted no part of this marriage, even though he agreed to perform the ceremony. And the reason for that is that John Adams had changed his major at Harvard from minister to being a politician, if you will, and to enter law school. And most people believed, and Abigail's father believed, that most attorneys lie. They make words say and mean things that they were never intended to say or mean. So he disapproved of John Adams switching from minister to attorney. That said, he agreed to marry them. She was 19, and which was young. He began courting her at the age of 15. Today that might get you in prison, or certainly an order to stay away from the home. So that said, the Second Continental Congress, how do we deal with the fact that a war of words had evolved into a shooting war? What do we do here? And most of the delegates at the Second Continental Congress wanted no part of a shooting war. They did not want to have this evolve into a declaration of war against Great Britain. How do we work this out? How do we reconcile with the king anyway? The king is our father. Many towns had already declared their independence, from Parliament. But to make war on our father, and I'm exaggerating to make the point, that was unnecessary. The king is sovereign. George III, he fathered, with the help of his wife, of course, Charlotte, they fathered 15 children. It's a lot of kids. And can't you imagine Charlotte saying, "Don't you have something to do besides hopping into bed with me? Don't you have something to do, an edict to write or to sign, or maybe do something about that trouble in New England?" Said, "No, not tonight. Tonight is our night." And sometimes people say Friday night is our movie night. Have you heard that? Friday night is our movie night. We either go out or we don't go out today, or we rent a movie. I will put that down. I want to gesture with it, and I'll drop it anyway. John Adams' reconciliation is impossible. And he told those fellow delegates from Massachusetts, "Let me do the talking. Everybody is afraid of us. That we're hotheads, we're troublemakers." So much trouble had started in the Bay State, hadn't it? Let me do the talking. And when he arrived in Philadelphia, he had Richard, a good friend of his, who had become a friend of his during the First Continental Congress, a man by the name of Richard Lighthorse Harry Lee. How about that? Richard Lee will do. Lighthorse Harry simply dealt with his military experience. We don't need to get into that. Richard Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee. And Lee and Adams had struck up a friendship during the First Continental Congress. And he knew that Lee was sympathetic to pushing back against Great Britain. And he approached Lee. He said, "Mr. Lee, will you make a recommendation that we form a committee?" Now hear me out here. Will you make the recommendation that we form a committee to lay out our grievances against Parliament, but really against George III, to lay out our grievances, to order them, to line them up? He said, "I cannot make that recommendation." Well, why not, Mr. Adams? Because no one likes me. No one likes me, which was true. Most people thought Adams was a hothead, a know-it-all, had to be the center of attention. Ask Abigail. Had to be the center of attention all the time. And he said, "Mr. Lee, will you make the recommendation that we form a committee just to lay out, to think about our grievances with the king? No one has to sign anything. No one has to vote for anything. And no one has to do anything. No one has to even nod their head. Just lay out a series of grievances." And he said to Mr. Lee, "Make sure I'm on that committee, though." and it becomes a committee of 5. Make sure I'm on that committee so we can steer it a little bit. So a committee of 5 over time became a committee of 3 because the 2 other delegates on that committee simply did not show up. They'd been going to maybe a baseball game, I don't know. The season opened in April, I don't know. They just did not show up. So a committee of 5 became a committee of 3. Adams, Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. By the way, I hope you took a look at the 3-part series on Benjamin Franklin. It was about a month ago. It was really terrific and wonderfully done. That said, let's move along. Committee of 5 became a committee of 3. And we need to lay out our grievances against the king. The king who early on, Thomas Paine had referred early on in January of 1775 in his pamphlet, Common Sense, had referred to the king as the royal brute of Britain. How about that? Talk about being alliterative. The royal brute of Britain. John Adams isn't prepared to go there yet. So they sit down. And Franklin said, I can't write this. I'm too old. I'm retired. Franklin was the oldest guy there. I'm too old. And if I write it, I know what the Continental Congress will do. They'll make all these revisions in it. And I treasure my words. I don't like people revising my words. John Adams said, I can't write it. Nobody likes me. And if it gets out there that I'm the lead author, that'll be enough for a no. Years later, if I can add parenthetically, years later, John Adams wished he had written the Declaration of Independence. He'd still be writing it today. He must have been part German. He just went on and on and on with his words. So they both spun their chairs. Can't you picture this? Spinning their chairs and looking at Jefferson. Jefferson was the youngest man there at 32. And everyone liked Thomas Jefferson. He could hide. Now, he was a bit of a rogue in many ways, but he could hide. I said, Mr. Jefferson, you're the youngest man here at 32. And everyone likes you. Will you write it? You're wonderful with prose. You write it. We'll read it. We'll make some observations, and then we'll pass it along to the membership of the Second Continental Congress. Everyone likes you. You're blue. John Adams, I'm red. I spark people. Everyone likes you. Will you write it? And we'll read it and make some observations. Now, Thomas Jefferson always traveled with a portable writing desk, the first computer, if you will. He always traveled with a portable writing desk and a trunk full of books. He was an intellectual. In fact, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, should be seen as being brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And Jefferson said, I'll write it. And as John Adams remembered, it took Jefferson 2 or 3 days to write it. And then he brought it down, and they looked it over. There's a wonderful painting done by, I've forgotten the guy's name. If I think of it, it'll come to me. But I'll describe it for you. It's all patriotic art. It never happened this way, but it's patriotic art. And I'll describe it for you, and you can look for it. It's Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin seated around a table, and they're looking it over. And on the floor are balls of paper. Like that, this won't do. This won't do. This won't do. And they missed the waste paper basket. I think I might have it written here. Let me take a quick look. I need these now. More than ever, I need these now, particularly to read my fine print. Nope. It ain't here, as Jerry Remy would say. No. It's a great piece of patriotic art, and you'll find it. The three of them are sitting around a table, and there are balls of paper rolled up and thrown on the floor. Now, that never happened, but it looks like they're going through draft and draft and draft. The Declaration of Independence went through 7 drafts. 7. And many of the drafts were done by the Second Continental Congress. So I always tell my students, if the Declaration of Independence went through 7 drafts, your essay should at least go through 3, a take-home essay. Maybe it'll come to me. Maybe I'll squeeze it out. So they write it up, and there are a few. I'll give you the number 1 correction, or number 2 corrections, made. One was that, this is by Benjamin Franklin, that these truths are self-evident. I'll go back to that in a minute. They're self-evident. They aren't necessary. These truths are self-evident. And I'll read this right from the document in a moment, that among these are life, the key word is among, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Among is a key word. Among. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Among suggests or implies that there are many more, aren't they? One thing that I do, and you would appreciate this, in class, everybody gets a copy of the Declaration of Independence, and I begin to read it. I spent a whole class day with it. 90 minutes. It's short. It's about 1,300 words. And students have never heard it, have never pursued the words of the Declaration of Independence. We will do part of it together. And what I do is, just to keep them on page, is I'll walk around the class and I'll read the Declaration of Independence. And then I'll stop and I'll say, what's the next word? So yeah, you weren't paying attention, were you? What's the next word? You weren't praying. I'll be back to you. Make sure you've been following. It's a good way to keep people on. See, I remember stuff. I'm coming back to you. You do not know the next word. I do that with the parts of the Constitution as well. I don't read the Constitution. That takes forever to get through. Even attorneys don't read it. I don't think Trump ever read it. Maybe Joe Biden ever read it. I'm not sure. President Biden. So when they're through with it, self-evident, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of, and this is Benjamin Franklin's hand again, the pursuit of property. He said, no, not property. I mean, that's too ordinary. Life, liberty, and happiness, not dirt. Happiness. Who pursues dirt? Happiness. And that stands today, doesn't it? So that they bring it down to after 2 or 3 days, they present it to the Continental Congress. And they spend several days reading it. They make 86 changes. 86 changes. Count them. And they reduce it by 25%. Actually, they make it more readable and doable. They reduce it by 25%. They make 86 changes. Thomas Jefferson is groaning to himself, is groaning to Benjamin Franklin. They have, and this is his verb, not mine, they have mangled my document, mangled it. And Franklin said, well, this is why I didn't write it. I'm a former editor. I know what's going to happen. They have mangled it. And Franklin and others convinced Jefferson that if this is your only contribution to our attempt to be free of England, you'll be honored for this. If this is the only thing you're remembered for, this will make you heroic. Be patient. The piece that they did take out, which you ought to, when you go home tonight, look at the original document. There's a paragraph. condemning slavery. Jefferson was a slaveholder. Half the men there were slaveholders. And they took it out because they blamed George III for slavery, for imposing slavery on the colonies. That isn't true. I mean, the French had, the Portuguese had, the Dutch had, and so forth. So read that. That whole paragraph is taken out because most of them were slaveholders. And we can't lose the Southern delegates. George Washington, who we appointed commander of the Continental Army, an army that didn't exist. Well, it did exist. He was the only guy in the Continental Army. And he's dispatched up to Cambridge to take control of these riffraff. This is my army? We'll talk about that some other day. So they make their 86 changes. They collapse it, by, 25%. And then there's the signing ceremony. But there is no signing ceremony. It's part of patriotic art. And you've seen this, that everybody's lined up by height, I don't know, or by alphabet. There was no signing ceremony. And you look at I think this is a Trumbull painting. You look at the Trumbull painting, everybody is there, with the same suit on. They all got a deal from whoever makes suits at that time. They're wearing the same shoes with the same socks, and they're all sitting there with their legs crossed, which you ought not do. They're sitting there with their legs crossed, and everybody looks calm, and nobody's quarreling, and nobody's finger pointing. There was a lot of argumentation going on. These were men of letters, men of words, men who always thought themselves right. John Adams was one of them. And as if there's a signing ceremony, that everybody walks up to the table and inks it. The only person that inked it at the time when it was finally adopted, and by the way, don't tell Keith Lockhart, the Declaration of Independence was voted on, on July 2nd. Don't tell Keith Lockhart. So what happened on July 4th? What happened on July 4th is they voted on the changes, not the Declaration. And all you need to do is go to the John Adams Library or what's online. And on July 2nd, he wrote a letter to Abigail, my dear friend. That's how they wrote that. My dear friend, my esteemed friend. Here, on July 2nd, he wrote a letter to Abigail. And in that letter, he said, July 2nd, we voted for the independency. And July 2nd will be celebrated with fireworks and bands and parades. This is July 2nd. And he's writing to Abigail. So what happened on July 4th? On July 4th, they voted on the changes. Not on the independency. They voted on the changes. But we've got it messed up, don't we? But don't tell Keith Lockhart. It'll disappoint him. And so don't even bother. We all celebrated on July 4th. And that signing ceremony never took place. Everybody lined up by height, I don't know, and one by one walking up to the table and signing off on it. The only person who signed it on July 2nd, or maybe July 4th, July 2nd, the only person who signed it was John Hancock with that bold signature right at the bottom, dead center, ground zero. And I don't know whether or not this is true or not, but in the history books it says that, or it reads that, John Hancock, led with the signature, that big, bold signature. Now today, it's in our vocabulary, isn't it? Give me your best signature. Give me your John Hancock, your best signature. And I've always made a point of that. I did with my boys. When you sign your name, sign it properly. Don't scribble it. Sign it Hylander, my last name. I gave you that name. Respect it with a big, bold signature. Don't scribble it. And they always get after me. Dad, no, don't dad me. Give me your best signature, or you're going to rewrite it and give it into your teacher with the best signature. Now, whether or not John Hancock said, I'm going to sign it so the king can read it without his glasses. I think that's simply folklore. But he signed it. And over the months in August, men who passed through Philadelphia signed it. And some of the men who signed it were not even there when it was written or voted on. So, along with John Hancock's signature, one of the signatures I like to look at is a signature from one of the delegates from Rhode Island. And his name was Stephen Hopkins. And if you look at Stephen Hopkins' signature, it looks like a bad cardiographic. I mean, it's all over the place. It's like that. And what he said was, I support this, but my handwriting doesn't show it. He had palsy, so his hand shook. So if you looked at the signature, it's all over the place. It looks like a bad EKG. It said, my heart is with you, but my hand is not. It looks like a bad cardiogram. That doesn't get in the history books either. I know sometimes you have to edit history books, but they're good little stories, that enliven the conversation. Meanwhile, George Washington is on his way to Cambridge to take command of the militia, which is to be his army. These are a bunch of drunks. He shows up in Cambridge. They're up all night, partying, drinking, chasing the women around, stealing whatever they could steal. And Washington walks in. This is my army? I'm going to fight the mightiest empire since Rome with this army, and they want to call me George? They want to address me by my first name? I'm George Washington. I'm a Virginia aristocrat. I own slaves. So did Thomas Jefferson. You want to call me by my first name? You want to elect your officers? And you're going to fight those guys over there in Boston? No way. So he has to straighten all of that out, and that's when he makes an attempt to bring Canada in as the 14th colony. And they said, we're very happy with Great Britain and being a member of the British Commonwealth. In fact, without the aid of France, the United States, or what became the United States, would be a member of the British Commonwealth today, like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. Maybe we would have been better off. I don't know. So it's written, it's signed, and off it goes to be read to the armies, to be read to the militia, to be read at town meeting, to be read at the end of church services. How about that? The black clergy, treasonous clergy, having it read at the end of a religious service. Families were broken apart by this. Towns divided over this. Benjamin Franklin's eldest son, or one of his sons, was a loyalist and was the governor of Connecticut. And he and his dad, Benjamin Franklin, had a meeting one night where they sat down and they discussed all night, are you with me as a revolutionary? And he would counter, are you with me as a patriot? And they argued until daybreak over that. His son, whose name I can't recall, his son was the royal governor of Connecticut. He had come right up in the ranks. And I'm not going to jeopardize my position as the royal governor of Connecticut. During the war, maybe it was New Jersey. It was New Jersey. And during the war, his son was arrested and jailed. And Franklin's son sent his dad a letter. Can you help me? Can you get me out of this fix? I'm in prison. And Franklin wrote back, no. You made your choice, and you chose against me. No, I will not work to get you out of prison. How about that for dividing families, for dividing towns, for dividing communities? We don't hear about that, do we? We don't read about that. Students don't hear that. That Franklin turned his son down. Was it Franklin's wife, who had a tough pregnancy, wrote him a letter and said, listen, I'm not feeling well. You know, I think I'm having a tough pregnancy. Can you come home and help me? Or just be with me, hold my hand. And he wrote her a letter. I'm busy. How about that? I'm busy. I'll get back to you later. Hang on. Her name was Deborah Reed. Can't you come home and hold my hand? This is a tough pregnancy. I'm busy. I'm busy here in France trying to secure loans and trying to make sure that the French send cannon, troops, a navy to help us out. Interesting stuff, isn't it? How about that? Getting a letter back from your husband. Hey, look, I'm busy. Doing the best you can with a tough pregnancy. Abigail, had in effect the same problem, that she was having a tough pregnancy. It just didn't feel right. I'm not sure what that means, but a woman knows, when this is not a good pregnancy, and she thinks I might die, during this pregnancy. 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 colonial women died during childbirth. And John was getting ready to go back to France to work out some of the details. She wasn't feeling right. And she made the decision, I'm not going to tell my husband because I know I'm helping him pack up. I know he needs to go to France and he wants to be at the center of attention. And he doesn't like Benjamin Franklin, who already was in France. I don't want him to get all the credit. So what she said is, I am not going to tell him I'm not feeling well and that I might die in pregnancy. So what she did behind John's back is that she wrote to her sister or in-laws, if I die in pregnancy, will you take this child, and this child and raise them? It happens all the time. She did not tell John because I don't want to deny him the opportunity to go back to France and work things out. How about that? For loyalty, for being self-serving. I am not going to ruin his plans to get to France. And if I die, he'll find about us 6 weeks later. I've already made arrangements to have the children raised by family members. That never gets in the history books, does it? So Washington's up in Cambridge. This is my army. Abigail is making a decision. I'm not going to tell John. Go. Go. I know you want to go. There's no signing ceremony. Look at it's called patriotic art. Look at the signing ceremony. We've all seen, I can't recall the author, of these 3 guys marching shoulder to shoulder with a fife and a drum and so forth. That's patriotic art. It never happened. But over time it did. And that gets in our textbooks, doesn't it? Like everyone supported the American Revolution. Adams got it right. A third, and a third. Just one quick story. John Adams and Benjamin Franklin did not get along. Benjamin Franklin was up all night, out all night, drinking. He liked his wine, and he liked carousing around with the women, drinking all night. And he would roll in at daybreak. John Adams was in bed at nightfall to get up and get ready to do paperwork. And in comes Franklin, stumbling, been out all night. And then they quarreled over whether it's best to open the window at night or to close it. Franklin said, open the window, fresh air. John, now close it, it's freezing in here. That happens today, doesn't it? We have closed the window. It's cold in here. No, I want it open. I want to breathe fresh air. So out it goes. And it's red, red, and red, and red again. A man by the name of Nixon read the Declaration of Independence from the balcony of the old State House, which is a beautiful building, isn't it? The old State House, the original, the site of British authority in the Mass Bay Colony. It wasn't supposed to be there. Years later, it was to be torn down, and I don't know, a CVS was put there or something. And It was to be torn down and used car lot. It doesn't matter. And the people in Chicago, where I'm from, there's no history in Chicago, not like colonial history. And when the city council of Chicago heard that the Bostonians were going to tear it down, they sent a note to the Massachusetts legislature. Don't tear it down. We'll buy it. We'll come out and we'll transport it. We have no colonial history. We'll buy it and mark it brick by brick, so we'll put it back together. We'll buy the thing. It's like having a yard sale, and when somebody wants it, say, maybe I don't want to get rid of that. And you pull it off the lawn. Maybe I do want to keep this. So when Chicago made the offer to buy it and come out and take it and transport it back, the Massachusetts legislature, well, maybe we don't want to get rid of this. And that saved it from becoming a used car lot. And it's brilliant. My point is, the first public reading, one of the first public readings of the Declaration of Independence was from the balcony of the old State House. The balcony is still there. Abigail was there with the children. And she hears this reading, huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. And she listens and says, this is how John's been talking for years. These are his words. I can hear his words. These are his words. And as she realized later on into a letter to John, when I heard it, these were your words, dear friend. You are a traitor. You are a traitor. This is lèse majesté. You are a traitor. And that makes me married to a traitor. And I only live a few miles from the British Army. So she writes to John, what should I do if the soldiers come and with the butt of their muskets begin pounding on the door? Open up, Mrs. Adams, open up. We want to look around. Open up. What should I do if they do that? And he writes back to her, well, take the children and run into the woods. What kind of response is that? Take the kids and run into the woods? What kind of response is that? Boy, was she ever on her own. When John was away in Philadelphia, 300 miles away, and in France, 3,000 miles away. Some of these women were tough, and they could really handle it. And he would write to her, and how properly to manure the field for planting, and how much manure, should the workers put down, thick, and make sure they earn it, make sure they work, and watch them lay it down to make sure it's right. What? Make sure it's right. And Abigail did. So it's being read, and it's being read. The Declaration of Independence is divided into, and here's when I walk around the room. I don't read the whole thing, but I'll say, what's the next word? You weren't paying attention, were you?
He says.
And I said, I'll come back to you. What's the next word? I'll come back to you. And I'll remember that. And you might need my blessing, when I'm doing the grades. What's the next word? And I'll come back to you maybe 2 paragraphs later. What's the next word? And you blurt it out, because I don't want him to know twice I wasn't paying attention. That's me. And if I put it, I told you this, if I put it on the board, you're going to see it again. Or I expect to see it again in an essay or in your final. If I put it on the board, it's important, and take it down. 4 parts. This is the best way if you ever teach the Declaration. Teach it in 4 parts. The first part is the preamble. The second part is the words of revolution. The third part is the charges, the indictment of the King of England. And the fourth part is the Declaration itself. So if you ever get a chance to teach the Declaration of Independence, the easiest way to get it, 4 parts. And the first part is the preamble. And the preamble is the why of the American Revolution, the why. All right? The Constitution is the how, how we're going to govern. And the Bill of Rights is the promise. So again, if you ever get a chance, the first part is the why, the Declaration. The Constitution is the how we're going to govern ourselves. And the third part is the promise, the Bill of Rights. See, I've got this thought out. I just don't walk in and wing it. Well, so maybe it does sound like that. When in the course of human events, the first part is we need to explain why. This was the age of the Enlightenment. Thank you, the Scottish philosophers. This is the age of the Enlightenment, the age of reason. We need to explain ourselves. There are reasons for things. There are reasons why there are earthquakes, meteors. There are reasons. And this, Madison, if you go farther, political science. There's a science of chemistry, the science of biology, the science of archaeology, and Madison, there is a science of politics as right. It isn't as accurate as chemistry, but there is a science of politics. Children, not children, my goodness, they're 19, 20, or 21 years old. They major in political science, don't they? It's not always accurate, but we need to explain ourselves. This is Jefferson, an expression of the American mind. It wasn't, of some American minds. And I bring you back to Adams, a third, the third. We need to explain ourselves. To whom? To our friends back in Great Britain. Only 1/3 of Parliament voted to send troops to America. We can work this out. We need to explain it to our friends in Britain. We need to explain it to the colonists themselves. And we need to explain it to our friends in Europe. See, the British would say we're not part of Europe. You know that. You know that. You're from Canada. We are not part of Europe. Just a piece of it. When in the course of human events, you've all heard that, haven't you? When in the course of human events, when things happen, and you might see a bumper sticker, when in the course of human events, which begins with the S word, it becomes necessary to explain ourselves. I don't like these glasses. Does anybody have a pair of glasses that I like that I keep? I don't like to return things. I'm always willing to share my books. Just get them back to me. My children, I'll share my children with you and you can keep them. Because you can make new ones, and it's always fun to make new children. Keeps you busy, right? It's cardiovascular. Think about that. It's cardiovascular. Now, so when in the course of human events, and I'm skipping here, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. A decent respect. This is the age of reason, the Enlightenment. We need to explain ourselves. We need to explain chemistry. We need to explain biology. We need to explain arithmetic. We need to explain science. Not science, political science. See this? I'm going to take somebody's glasses. I'm going to take yours, depending on the magnification.
4.5?
No. $1.50.
No. Diopters.
Pardon me?
4.5 diopters.
This is what I use. $15. CVS. We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is Franklin. Self-evident. Jefferson had written sacred. No, they are self-evident. And that we are endowed by our Creator, with their Creator, with certain inalienable rights, that among these, key word is among, and I always stop and ask that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'll stop and I'll say, okay, what does among suggest? And I'll go to someone and say, you. What does, I'm just saying you. What does among suggest? You tell me. And I zero right in. I'll walk right up to a student. And I do that. I'm in the class. I'm in the class. What does among suggest to you? That there are many. Thank you. Said, you've got it. You just hit a grand slam. Thank you, Jennifer. You hit it. You're not Jennifer. I hope not. That which suggests that there are many, many more. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And again, to remind you that Jefferson's first draft has said that property, and Franklin, property, dirt, it doesn't sing among, da-da, life, da-da, liberty, da-da, property, blah. Happiness, happiness, happiness. And then you go on from there. And happiness, as he meant it, as they meant it, happiness, there's no Department of Happiness. There's no cabinet member, the Department of Happiness. It's the role of government to protect the coastline, to settle disputes among the states, and to create situations where you can be happy, that the government provides an opportunity for you to be happy as you define it, and not happy, happy, happy. There's no cabinet position, happiness, as you define it, and that's the role of government, to make your life livable. People forget that, don't they? Do they ever forget? That's what they meant, to make your life livable. What makes you happy? Not happy, happy, that you walk around grinning all the time. That if you do that, you should be put in prison and given medicine. There are people like that, aren't there? They don't get it. Here's the bombshell, part 2. Here's the philosophy, here's the bombshell, part 2 of the Declaration. That whenever, about 55 words, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, life, liberty, and happiness, becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, life, liberty, and happiness, on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. It's not getting a vanilla ice cream. It's not taught that way, is it? Happiness, that what makes you pleasant, what makes you comfortable in your life, that you feel successful. At the very end of this, it is the right to, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new grants, new guards for their future. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. These are Jefferson's facts. These are the facts of the Continental Congress. Now we go into the meat of it. Most of these men were attorneys, so you need to line up your facts to prove it. That we need to separate from Great Britain to make war on our father. And in that middle passage, these are attorneys, and it is he, not Parliament. Parliament is faceless, isn't it? It's like saying Congress. He. And everybody knew that he was George III when he had time without running around with his wife. He has, I'm just going to read a few. He has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. The most wholesome and necessary for the public good. We don't use the word wholesome that often, do we? That he or she is a wholesome person. You don't hear that, do you? That what is he is going to act in a wholesome manner. So let me just read you a few of them. So what has he done? Part 3. He, not Congress, rather, not Parliament. He. What is he? Oh, he is kept among us in times of peace, standing armies, without the consent of our legislature. He has deprived us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. This is my favorite. It is so full of active verbs. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. What active verbs? Plundered, ravaged, burnt, destroyed the lives of our people. Those are active, aren't they? There's nothing passive about that verb. He has at this time transporting former armies, the Hessians. Back then, Germany wasn't Germany. It was all little principalities. And each of the princes of Germany had an army, and they would loan it to you for a fee. And if that soldier didn't return, you had to pay more money. Or if that soldier returned missing a limb or wounded, that was more. It was a business. The Hessians, the Prince of Hesse. Now this is Jefferson being coy with us, being a little cute with us. Your homework tonight? I usually don't assign homework, and you know that. You know that. You know that. Read this aloud to yourselves. Read it and savor the words, how sweet the words are. Whenever I have a 4th of July picnic, usually I can't have it on the 4th, but if you show up to have my hamburgers and hot dogs and drink my Samuel Adams beer, it's Samuel. He did not like Sam. I was christened Samuel. No, I was christened, Samuel, not Sam. So everybody gets a piece of the Declaration to read. So if you walk in, I've got it underlined for you in yellow. And that's the part you read. Then I save the last part for me, because I'm selfish. And I host the party. And the last part is the actual Declaration itself. All right, so here's Jefferson being coy with us. In every stage of these oppressions, every time we've complained, we just get slapped down. In every stage of these oppressions, we petition for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions, have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, George III, a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a people. We're making war on the king. You, sire, are unfit to be my father. You, sire, are unfit to be the ruler of a free people. You, sire, are not worthy of my love, my affection, and I am breaking with you. That's tough, huh? I am breaking with my father. I don't want to hear your voice. I don't want to hear from you at all. I am breaking with you. You are unfit to be my father. That's tough to say to your father. And then they go on, the last part is to announce their independency. Years later, I'm going to go to John Adams now, because he's such a scold. He's speaking to us today, this afternoon, whatever today's date is. He's speaking to us. He's writing so many years right after the Revolution, but he's speaking to us. Posterity, you, me, exclamation point. People do not use exclamation points today, do they? It has fallen out of use. Posterity, exclamation point. You will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that ever I took half the pains to preserve it. If you do not, he's talking to us today. Posterity, I will repent having helped at all. If you go to the Adams, do we have time? Oh, we're over the time, but we got a few minutes. I'll trade on your goodwill. You go to the Boston Public Library, and John Adams he donated all of his books to the Boston Public Library. And there's a John Adams room. And you go in, and you pull the books down, with your gloves on, of course. And he writes in the margins. And his 3 favorite words, when he disagreed with anybody, his 3 favorite words, fool, lout, L-U-T, fool, lout, and dunderhead. And you can take the word dunderhead and turn it into something else. Fool, lout, and dunderhead. Who would ever believe this? Who would ever write this? Who would ever suggest this? This is John Adams. Bang, bang, bang. Ask Abigail. He was always quarrelsome. And the last part, the last paragraph, is the Declaration of Independence. And the last line rarely gets read or remembered. We mutually pledge to each other. This is the last line. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I will not let you down, and I don't expect you to let me down. I may never see you again, but I know in the thick of things, you're with me. In the thick of things, I'm with you. I pledge to you my life, my fortune, and by fortune, they didn't make money. He meant my future. I pledge you my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. I know you will not let me down, and I will not let you down. I may never see you again, but I have your word, and you have given me your word, and I will give you my word. Back then, a man's word, written or spoken, was his bond. How about that? We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Elbridge Gary, as it was called back then, was at this. And he caught the eye of Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Harrison. They all knew each other. They worked in a room maybe 3 times the size of this room. They all knew each other. They knew their voices. They could tell by their footsteps who was coming. We can do that today, can't we? You can tell who's coming down the hall by their footfalls. You know their voice, by their laughter, or when they're scolding you. You know that. And Elbridge Gerry looked across the room, and he caught the eye, and I'll close with this. He caught the eye of Harrison, of William Harrison. He said, "You are lucky, Mr. Harrison. You are lucky." "I'm lucky." "Yes, you are lucky because you are fat. And when they hang you, you'll die quickly because you're fat. And all that weight on that rope will break your neck. Me, I'm thin and skinny, and I will dangle on that rope for a while. You are lucky. Not if they catch you, when they catch you." This is treason. Absolute treason. Without France, we lose. Without France, somehow it gets negotiated. So before we leave in radiant contentment, and all of you have your independence, and I do, because we all showed up. Everybody else is a traitor. Everybody else living out there in Holliston who's not here today, you are not independent. Good afternoon and good luck, and be kind to each other.